Hey, what's up, guys? This is D, and you're watching the Rear Naked Podcast. As always, I want to thank you guys for continuing to support the channel so far. And if you haven't, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button down below on the YouTube channel and head over to Facebook and Instagram, and you can follow us at the Rear Naked Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about UFC 240 coming up this Saturday in Edmonton with Max Holloway versus Frankie, Edgar, and Cris Cyborg versus Felicia Spencer. Before we do, I want to touch on a couple of things from the last 2 weeks' cards. First and foremost, Uriah Faber with his win against Ricky Simone 2 weeks ago, and there's been a lot of talk back and forth via social media with Henry Cejudo and Uriah Faber, and it'd be interesting to see if they put that fight together, man. I think that's probably the fight to make right now. So I think if a lot of people counting Uriah Faber out, obviously he's shown from his last fight against a tough guy like Ricky Simone that he can come out with that explosive ability to end a fight in the first round still. So I would love to see Uriah Faber challenge Henry Cejudo. I think if anybody can give Henry Cejudo a run for his money right now, it's probably Uriah Faber. So that would be an awesome fight to see. We'll see what happens with that. Other than that, this Saturday we had 3 fights in a row that all ended in first round KOs or TKOs. First and foremost, Walt Harris with an 11-second knockout over Olenek, which was crazy. And then Greg Hardy and Dan Hooker both able to end their fights in the first round via TKO and KO. So props to those guys, and look forward to seeing what the matchmakers put together for the 3 of them. Walt Harris definitely making some noise, man, as well as Greg Hardy. Other than that, we can jump right into UFC 240 coming up this Saturday in Edmonton. We got Max Holloway facing Frankie Edgar for the men's featherweight title. This is Max's third title defense at featherweight after facing a tough loss against Dustin Poirier as a move up to 55 a couple of weeks ago. I don't think it's taken anything away from Max's reign as champion of the featherweight division. He's the toughest dude there. There hasn't been anybody that's been able to challenge him. I thought Ortega was going to be able to beat him. Ortega couldn't stand with him, couldn't get him to the ground. I think if Ortega could have got him to the ground, it would have been a different story, but Ortega didn't even look to even want to try really too much. He tried later on in the later rounds, but he really was. It seemed like he was a little too proud in trying to stand and show off his striking game, and it just wasn't the same caliber of a guy like Max's, man. Max is, that's what Max specializes in. So be interesting to see, man. A lot of people counting Frankie out. He hasn't done a whole lot since his loss to Ortega, and then he had one fight last year where he beat Cub Swanson pretty decisively, but it wasn't a finish. So it's one of those things, man. It's if you can't finish Cub Swanson, you probably can't finish Max Holloway. But we'll see what happens, man, because Frankie's really good at mixing it up, and he's been throwing a lot more leg kicks in and low calf kicks and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens if he can get in there and put the pressure on Max, and maybe give Max something that he's not used to having, because Max is used to being the guy that applies the pressure, and he can do it 5 rounds, he can do it 3 rounds, he could do it 10 rounds. So I don't think a guy like Frankie Edgar is necessarily going to gas out, but I think as it gets into deeper waters, it's definitely going to become an advantage for Max Holloway. But yeah, I can't really call that. I'm going to go for Max in that fight, but it's one of those things where that fight could end at any second, man. And then we got Cris Cyborg coming back against Felicia Spencer, and this is a tough fight for Cyborg again, man. While Cyborg's really as tough as they come, and I expect her to come back from that loss to Amanda Nunes, really motivated, and she's been training in South Africa with a good friend of hers and kind of switched her camp up and whatnot. We'll see what happens with that, man. She's definitely, never anybody to sleep on, and honestly, the only person that's ever beat her was Amanda Nunes. But being that Amanda Nunes is a lot smaller than Felicia Spencer, I would expect Felicia Spencer to come in and be able to keep her at distance and probably dominate her as well. Felicia Spencer's been a black belt in Taekwondo since the age of 12. Then she went from point fighting competitions to grappling competitions and winning those, to being in Invicta FC and working her way up through there to ultimately making her debut in the UFC last time against my girl Megan Anderson, and came in and surprised everybody, man. I didn't think she'd be able to meet Megan Anderson, and she did. So she got on top of her and dominated her with her pressure and her top game. So I think that's exactly what Cyborg's in danger of having happen to her. If she doesn't watch her game, doesn't come in and catch her with a couple hard rights right away, and really get respect from her, because Felicia's got a great striking game, man, and she can switch it up and go to the ground at any time. So this is a really tough fight for both girls, but I think Felicia Spencer's probably going to get the win on that one. Other than that, we'll jump right into a couple of fan questions, and after that, we'll take a look at the fight picks. This first fan question comes from Scott in Tulsa, and Scott wanted to know who I thought Jorge Masvidal is going to fight next. It's a great question, man. It could be any number of people right now at 170. Leon Edwards definitely thinks that he deserves to fight Masvidal next, but I know Masvidal thinks that, he's already leaps and bounds past fighting a guy like Leon Edwards right now, and he wants a shot at that title. So if they don't give Masvidal Usman next, or don't give Colby Usman next, I think it'd be interesting to see Jorge fight Colby. I would love to see him beat the shit out of Colby Covington, man. But honestly, I think he can beat any of the four main names that are kind of in the hat right now, and that'd be Colby Covington, Leon Edwards, Mike Perry, or Kamaru Usman. So, the fact that he came in and did what he did to Till, and I didn't expect him to do that. I'm a big fan of Till's, but I also knew what Masvidal was capable of. Came in there, knocked Till out, and, started looking for that belt right away, and I think rightfully so, because he's been in the game a long time. He's no joke. And he doesn't fuck around, man. He comes there, and if he's talking shit, he's going to back it up. He's not one of those people that just talk shit and then goes in there and gets his ass beat like Ben Askren. So yeah, man, it'd be interesting to see. Either way, I'm down to watch him fight Mike Perry, Leon Edwards, Colby, or Usman, man. And I think he deserves a shot at the title. I think if they give that to Colby first, then it'd be cool to see him maybe up against Mike Perry, but honestly, I don't think Perry or Edwards deserve to be in the hat right now, because none of them are doing anything really. Edwards didn't really win that fight in overwhelming fashion last Saturday, and Perry hasn't been doing anything impressive either. So I think the fight that the fans would really want to see is Jorge versus Colby, man, and for good reason. So other than that, our second question comes from Tara in Los Angeles. She wanted to know, will Cyborg retire if she loses this fight? I think it's a good possibility. I think that if she loses to Felicia Spencer, which she has a good chance of doing, I think that she probably should retire, because there's not going to be anywhere else for her to go after that. She's already switched her camp to a friend of hers in South Africa and been training out there to kind of change things up and refocus and come back. But we'll see what happens. If she doesn't win this fight after doing all that, then maybe it's time to think about retiring. And she's had an amazing career, man. She's the most dominant female fighter in the history of MMA. So she's been knocking people out for over a decade, and it's just one of those times right now where a lot of that new blood's coming in, and they're so evolving, and there's so much to their game. They're so multifaceted that the older people who are more just specialists in one side and more had to add all the other stuff to their game afterwards are finding that it's harder to compete with them. So we'll see, man. Saturday's going to be a hell of a card. There's a lot of good fights other than that, but those are the two main fights on the card. Other than that, if you guys have any fan questions, remember to submit them via email, rearnakedpodcast@gmail.com, or via Facebook Messenger at the Rear Naked Podcast. And we'll take a look at the fight picks right now coming up this Saturday in Edmonton, UFC 240. All right, so kicking things off in the early prelims, the men's heavyweight division, we've got Tanner Buzzer versus Giacomo Lemos, and we've got Lemos there. Then moving up to the men's welterweight division, we've got Eric Koch taking on Kyle Stewart, and we've got Koch there. And heading off the early prelim card in the women's flyweight division, we've got Jillian Robertson taking on Sarah Froda, and we've got Froda for that fight. And kicking things off at the prelims, the men's flyweight division, we've got Alexander Pantoja taking on Davison Figueiredo, and we got Figueiredo on that fight. Then moving up to the men's featherweight division, we've got Gavin Tucker taking on Seungwoo Choi, and we've got Choi in that fight. And then again in the featherweight division, we've got Min Hakeem Dawoodu taking on Yoshinori Hori, making his debut from Pancratia, and we'll see what happens, man. I think that Hori's probably going to get the win in that fight because Dawoodu had a pretty lackluster performance in his last fight, and he didn't really look like he wanted to attack that much. So if he fights this way against a guy like Yoshinori Hori making his debut from Asian Pancratia fighter, we'll see what happens. I think that Hori's probably going to come in there and overwhelm him if he fights the way that he does in his previous fight. And then heading things off of the prelim card in the women's flyweight division, we got Alexis Davis taking on Viviane Araujo, and we've got Araujo there. Kicking things off in the main card, the men's middleweight division, we got Marc-Andre Barriault taking on Christoph Jotko, and that's one of those. It's a really even matchup, but I think Barriault probably has a little bit of the advantage on that, so we're going to go with Barriault, and probably going to be a knockout. Then in the men's lightweight division, we've got Olivier Aubin-Mercier taking on Arman Sarukian, and although Sarukian's a tough opponent, man, I think that we're going to go with Aubin-Mercier in that fight because he's been a tough fighter. Every fight that I've watched him fight in, he's impressed me, whether he's won or lost. So we're going to go with Mercier for that one. Then moving up the middleweight division, we got Jeff Neal taking on Nico Price. And, originally I was going to go with Nico Price on this fight, but, especially what he did in his last fight. But we switched it up and we went with Jeff Neal for this one. Just sort of a last second kind of gut thing that I thought. So I think Jeff Neal probably going to find a way to come with the win here. Maybe a head kick. Who knows? And then for the co-main event, the women's featherweight division, we got Cris Cyborg against Felicia Spencer. And we're going to go with Felicia Spencer for this one, like I mentioned earlier. I think Felicia Spencer is going to outstrike her, going to be able to keep her at distance and maybe hold off the pressure initially that Cyborg's used to being able to get her wins off of. So that being said, if she can do that, I think Felicia Spencer's gonna be able to surprise her with a couple of head kicks, maybe something, mix it up, and take her to the ground and finish her from there. Who knows? We'll see what happens. We got Spencer in that fight, though. And then in the main event, the men's featherweight title bout, we got Max Holloway defending his title against Frankie Edgar. Now, a lot of people counting Frankie Edgar out because of his age and the fact that he's been in the UFC for so long. But honestly, I think that we've seen Frankie fighting at his peak right now. This is the best I've ever seen Frankie mix it up on his feet as far as throwing so many more low calf kicks and stuff like that at the end of big combos to be able to throw his opponents off and take him to the ground and turn on his jiu-jitsu game if he wants to, or his ground and pound, or his wrestling. So it's one of those things where he's becoming incredibly well-rounded. And, he's definitely got the ability to come in here and take this belt from Max right now if anybody ever has. So we're still going to go with Max on this fight, but it's going to be a fucking hell of a fight. And with that being said, remember to submit your fight picks every week. And if anybody picks a perfect fight card, we'll send you a free Rear Naked Podcast t-shirt. You could submit your fight picks via email to rearnakedpodcast@gmail.com or over at the Facebook page via Messenger at the Rear Naked Podcast. All right, guys, that's going to be it for the show this week. I want to thank you for continuing to tune in and support the channel. Please do me a favor if you haven't already and hit the subscribe button down below on the YouTube channel and follow us at the Rear Naked Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks.